Reports of committees. We have the Committee of the Whole report. Anybody like to move that recommendation? Councillor Freeman, Councillor Henry. Any other discussion? All those in favor? That's all of us. Thank you. Consent motion. There's 3 items in there. Anybody want anything removed? Questions? Seeing none. A mover. Councillor Whaley, Councillor Freeman. All those in favor? That's all 3 approved. Staff reports. We're going to go with we're going to start with item 5B, continue on, and we'll come back to A later. First up then is the Columbia Street widening and reconstruction. We're prepared by Francis Reyes. Welcome, Francis. Welcome, Phil. I think it's for information, but I think you have a few words to say about it.
I would like to start off with a brief background on the project. The planned growth on Waterloo's west side will see an increase in traffic conditions along Columbia Street. West corridor, as such, the need for widening of Columbia Street West into 4 lanes, including Class C environmental assessment, was identified in the Transportation Master Plan. On December 2013, Council approved the preferred solution that recommended through the Class EA process. In addition to completing the EA, in 2014, IBI Group were retained to complete the detailed engineering design for the project. The tender was advertised to pre-qualified bidders on June of 2016, and all bids were above budget. IBI, through the EA process, identified the bridge option as the preferred solution, with the cost of the bridge roughly between 40 to 50% of the overall project cost. Now, there may be less costly alternatives, which can also satisfy the requirements of the EA, and that's what we're looking at right now. So right now we're currently exploring different options to minimize the cost and stay within the budget envelope, and we're aiming to re-tender the project early in 2017.
Great. Thank you very much, Francis. Do we have questions on the Columbia Street widening project? Councillor Whaley?
Yeah, $5.4 million is a lot. It's a big surprise for everybody. One of the questions I have with respect to finding the money, is it still going to go ahead in 2017 if we do find the money?
That's the plan.
The tender list, I think there was 4 people who responded to the tender. I wonder if we broadened the scope, the area that we could get more tenders in. It seems to me that these things ebb and flow. Some years everybody's busy. The next year, all the construction work's done, and there's a lull, and so that rates change. And I'm sure we just caught a real peak period of things going on, especially in our region with LRT taking up a lot of subcontractor work. Has there been any thought about expanding the scope of who might qualify as a bidder?
Yep, good comment, Councillor. It's our intent as part of the reassessment of all the different alternatives to see the feasibility of going with a culvert option. If we can eliminate the bridge option, then we can open up the bidding process to a lot more consultants and eventually, hopefully, reduce cost with more competition.
Mm-hmm.
So this particular stream winds throughout under many major roadways, including Fisher-Hallman Road. Has the solution? How come they didn't require a bridge?
I think with this particular project, there's a lot of environmental considerations that had to be accounted for. First off, we don't have the best soil conditions in the area. Plus, we're also within the provincially sensitive wetland. Hence, essentially, the bridge will provide the best solution in terms of providing and hitting all the targets in the EA from an environmental perspective. To provide a quick, number or analogy, a bridge probably provides you an 8 out of 10 in terms of a preferred solution. But in terms of what we're looking at right now with culvert, with the different culvert options. We may not be able to provide the 8 out of 10, but we can provide a 7 out of 10 perhaps, and that's what we're juggling at right now, just weighing the pros and cons.
Thank you.
Thank you. Councillor Freeman, please.
Through you, Mayor Jaworski. So I just wanted to get a better idea. When you went through the pre-qualification process, how many folks did apply for pre-qual?
6 contractors.
Okay, so you shortlisted to 4. Okay, all right. And I do know that one of the big differences between this intersection and Fisher-Hallman is the grade change for that. And I think it's an environmentally significant wetlands. So, yeah, it's, yeah. I just didn't know whether you could go back to the pre-qual and expand it to the all 6, but I don't know.
Yeah, if we, depending on the outcome of our analysis right now, if we do end up proceeding with the culvert option, then we can open it up to any contractors. At that point in time, we wanted to pre-qualify contractors because of the bridge component and some of the complexities that surround it. But with the culvert option, we can certainly open up to everyone for more competition.
Excellent. Oh, and Phil, and then Councillor Durrell has a question. Go ahead, Phil.
Through you, Mayor Jaworski, to Councillor Freeman. Actually, through the pre-qualification process, we did qualify 6, and only 4 of them submitted tenders. So we did have all 6. Now, those groups were basically, the nature of the work is probably, it's almost equally split dollar-wise between the bridge and the road works. So we found several of the groups had a road contractor as a prime contractor with a bridge as a sub, and then the other ones were opposite. So there were several groups that were in on both of the, right? And so some of them dropped out in the end. So in the end, 6 were qualified and only 4 submitted.
Thank you. Thank you very much. Councillor Durrell, please.
So I actually just wanted some clarification, and you said 8 out of 10 is the bridge, 7 out of 10 might be the other option, and that would be the culvert option. Is that correct?
That's correct.
And then my other question is, how did we get so off with 5 million when we're budgeting for these in the future? How did that massive gap occur?
Basically, we relied on at that point with the engineer's estimate. And the engineer's estimate at that point in time we had was roughly about $9 million. And then now with the most recent engineer's estimate was close to about 9.5, and then including contingency going roughly above about 10 million. So that was our basis in terms of what we relied upon.
Thank you. Seeing no further questions, thank you very much for the update, and thank you very much, Francis.
Thank you, Mayor. Thank you, councillors.
Next up is the Cultural Heritage Landscape Inventory Terms of Reference, prepared by Michelle Lee, and I think Michelle will have a few things to say to us as well. Thank you.
Good afternoon, Mayor Jaworski and Council, and thank you for setting up my presentation here. I just wanted to provide a brief overview of the Cultural Heritage Landscape Inventory study that's proposed today, partly because I know that the term Cultural Heritage Landscape is a relatively new one for this council and this community, as well as many other communities in Ontario. The PPS defines a cultural heritage landscape as a geographical area of heritage significance which has been modified by human activities and is valued by a community. So the PPS actually requires municipalities to conserve significant cultural heritage landscapes, and its definition recognizes that some places of heritage value or significance to a community might not always be individual properties, and they might not always fit within the definition of a heritage conservation district. So this landscape definition captures all of those other types of areas that a community might want to conserve. I provide here a couple of examples of types of cultural heritage landscapes. They can include agricultural landscapes. They can also include neighborhoods like a heritage conservation district. They can include cemeteries, industrial complexes, man-made parks as opposed to purely natural parks, and then structures like bridges within a riverscape. The defining characteristics of a cultural heritage landscape are that it tends to have a cluster of resources that together provide some information that individually they would not be able to provide. So for example, in the case of an agricultural landscape, it's the collection of all the buildings and outbuildings and the agricultural fields around it that help provide information about that landscape, as opposed to the conservation of a singular farmhouse. We plan for cultural heritage landscapes for a variety of reasons. One is it is a policy requirement of the PPS, and the ROP and our OP have policies pertaining to cultural heritage landscapes in terms of their identification and conservation. But there are a number of other reasons why it's a good idea. It's a way of proactively planning for landscapes that are of value to a community. It ensures that sense of place, quality of life, and community character are all incorporated into the land use planning process. So the terms of reference in front of you today is phase one of a three-phase or proposed three-phase process for identifying cultural heritage landscapes and conserving them. This terms of reference talks about just an inventory. So that's just a look, very high-level look at potential cultural heritage landscapes in the community and narrowing them down to those that are considered significant, both by the heritage experts or consultants that will be brought into the project, as well as those landscapes that are valued by the community. So public input is an integral part of this inventory. The second phase would be a technical study, and that would be a study that coming out of the inventory, there might be an identified cultural heritage landscape, and the technical study would then look at that landscape in more detail and provide specific, a specific set or plan for its conservation. And then the last phase, or last step in the phase, would be an OP designation, which is a requirement of the regional official plan that any significant cultural heritage landscapes be identified in the OP. This inventory that is proposed today is trying to reach out to the community and use a community-based research approach to ensure that the landscapes that we do identify are those that are truly reflective of those values that are shared by our community members. So in addition to the community outreach, there'll also be ample opportunity for council feedback. There'll be regular updates on key milestones, and then a draft and final report coming to council for your consideration. I think that's it for me, so I'm happy to answer any questions you might have.
Thank you very much, Michelle. Questions? Councillor Whaley?
Interesting report to read. I wonder if the intention is to take a snapshot of today's cultural landscape, and leave it at that, or are we looking forward or backwards, and if backwards, how far backwards?
So the purpose of the study is to take a snapshot of today's look at the cultural heritage landscapes. One of the criteria for evaluating whether it's significant is historical integrity. So using that criteria, there will be a requirement to understand how that landscape looked in the past, but what we're looking at is today, what does it look like, and what are the possibilities for the future. So it's more of a present and future type study.
So to help me understand a little better, I'm going to give you an example. Do you know where Bucks Hill is?
Bucks Hill? No, I don't.
Does anybody here know where Bucks Hill is?
Only Mr. Rapp.
Only me and Mr. Rapp. Isn't that amazing? Mr. Nevin, do you remember Bucks Hill? So Bucks Hill is like a very famous feature of our city going back into my childhood, back in the 18th century. And it's a very famous place that we all knew so much about. And I'd wondered, when I was reading the report, if Bucks Hill is to be lost forever when Cameron and I finally fade away. And I thought this would be the opportunity to capture the famous Bucks Hill which happens to be the hill on King Street, and at the top of which is Columbia Street, and the bottom which is University Avenue. So that hill going up is famous Bucks Hill. And I wondered if there was an opportunity for us to, as we're doing this exercise, look back a little bit and capture some of the remarkable different names that were before. And I'm sad to hear that it's not part of your plan. You know, we have some trees in Waterloo Park. I bet you one or two of which were planted by Abraham Erb. And I don't know why, hopefully somebody figures out to go and clone them before they're dead. But because they're in the past, we would not have a record of the fact that Abraham Erb planted some trees in what was called Central Park back then. And so I was just curious, and I hope that when you're doing this, you'll consider not just today's snapshot, but have just a little wider parameters about this remarkable place, which is Waterloo.
Thank you. We'll definitely take that into consideration.
Thank you. Councillor Freeman, please.
Through you, Mayor Jaworski, thank you for your report. I'm particularly keen to see this, as you know. There's a lot of folks in my neighborhood who want to see the area that used to be under the Veterans Land Act to be considered as a heritage landscape, with the lot sizes being the way they are, the house setbacks, the lighting features that reside in many of the areas. And I know that my concern is that it won't rise to the top because of some of the other heritage landscapes that are located primarily in the uptown. And so I wanted to just say this publicly, that I'm hopeful that there'll be an eye towards, I'm going to actually say, some of the newer neighborhoods, because that would have been constructed in the late 40s, early 50s, that area. And as Michelle knows and council may not, we actually still have a few folks who are surviving spouses of veterans that bought their homes under the Veterans Land Act. And so I just don't want to lose that gift of people while we have the opportunity. So helping me to understand how people can be involved in this will be helpful. I'd like to help get citizens involved.
Yeah, through you, Mayor Jaworski, there'll be a call for public engagement, and I'll be reaching out to council as well as the broader community to encourage them to participate in a series of community mapping exercises where we can get together as a group or as a neighborhood and sort out what areas are of value to the community. So that will definitely be an opportunity for your neighborhood to directly put their vote in, let's say, in terms of what places in the community they value the most. So as the project unfolds, I'll be keeping this council abreast of those opportunities for public engagement.
And for me, what might be a timeline for the first two steps? Is that like a year and a half of work to do the inventory and second step before the official plan, or what sort of? To you, Mayor Jaworski. The proposed study in this report would be initiated right away, but the consultant would be hired in January. The goal would be to have that project wrapped up by the end of that year. I don't want to speculate the timing of the subsequent studies, because a lot will depend on what the report says and what council feels about the outcome of that report. Mm-hmm. So, but I'm thinking about a year for this particular study, and then hopefully we can get some real direction from that report and move forward quickly on key landscapes that people value. I'm trying to intersect the next official plan, that we would be ready to intersect that. Yeah. And then could you help me understand the difference, and perhaps you're going to say there's a great difference, between a heritage district and a cultural heritage landscape?
So a cultural heritage landscape is a broad term that can include a district. So it's an umbrella term. A district is a specific area that is designated under the Ontario Heritage Act, and that's one of the many tools that you could use to protect a cultural heritage landscape, but it's not the only tool.
Okay.
So that's how they relate.
Excellent. Any further questions? And would somebody willing to move this motion? Councillor Freeman, Councillor Henry? Any further discussion? All those in favor? It's all of us. Thank you very much, Michelle. D, City of Waterloo Telecommunications Facility Policy Update prepared by Danielle Ingram. And we have a presentation. Welcome.
Good afternoon, Mayor Jaworski and members of council, city staff members. I am pleased to be here to provide you with a very brief overview of the City of Waterloo Telecommunication Facility Policy Update, which I'm sure you all found as a very riveting topic. I will be brief in my presentation. And in terms of background, the telecommunication facility process is governed by Industry Canada through the Client Procedure Circular. This was updated in July of 2014 through issue number 5. The City of Waterloo, it's important to note, is a commenting agency, with Industry Canada being the federal approval authority. In 2009, when the City of Waterloo approved the first version of this policy, it provided preferred siting criteria within the City of Waterloo. It provided a level field of understanding about our expectations for proponents or applicants of all telecommunication facilities within the city boundaries. I have a quick few slides on the summary of the CPC amendments, very briefly, because there's far more detail within the CPC and also within the report provided to you. However, the CPC now applies to anyone installing or modifying a telecommunication facility, regardless of the type of facility. So this now applies to Crown corporations, businesses, telecommunication carriers, broadcasters, members of the public who have ham radio antennas, as well as municipalities. A change in terminology was included from telecommunication tower to telecommunication facility. There is a new requirement for public consultation on all proposals. Previously, public consultation was not required on all types of applications, so this was something that municipalities across Ontario had pushed for. There is now a time limit on a construction period within which to have these facilities up and running after any sort of approval has been granted. The new CPC also reduced and specified the number of exemptions through their default process in the CPC. New facilities less than 15 meters above ground level are required to have public consultation if they are from a telecommunication carrier, a broadcaster, or a third-party tower. All other types of towers under 15 meters above ground level would be exempt from public consultation. Modifications to existing facilities, provided the height increase is no more than 25%, are also exempt unless they are constructed by a telecommunication carrier, a broadcaster, or a third-party business. Modifications to non-tower structures, such as rooftops, antenna systems, water towers, lamp posts, those types of facilities are exempt. And temporary facilities for special events or emergency operations, provided they're no longer than 3 months in duration, are also exempt. The new CPC also brought the regulations into compliance with other pieces of federal legislation, such as the Canadian Environmental Assessment Act, the Canadian Environmental Protection Act, the Migratory Birds Convention Act, and the Species at Risk. In terms of the city's policy, we have made some amendments just to bring it into compliance with the updated CPC. So a change in terminology from co-location to shared facilities, and as well as from tower to facility as applicable. There is an inclusion or a new requirement for public consultation on all facilities unless they're specifically exempt through our policy. And we updated some references to staff titles, the CPC date, and the issue number. I will just note that the updated policy has been reviewed and commented on by Industry Canada. They were satisfied with the updates to our policy, and they have used our previous version of the policy as a best practice throughout Ontario and provided it to other municipalities who are in the process of creating a policy. So through the report, you do have 2 recommendations in front of you, and I would be happy to answer any questions that you might have at this time.
Questions from council? I have one. As some municipalities move to streetlights and streetlights contain telecommunications and that, I saw in there it was below 15 meters is exempt, I assume. How do streetlights fit into this?
Right, so to you, Mayor Jaworski, provided it is a Crown Corporation, a municipality, or another governmental body that is creating those facilities, then they would be exempt from the public consultation process. If it is a telecommunication carrier, a broadcaster, or any third-party facility operator, then they would have to also go through the public consultation process.
Thank you. Seeing no further questions, somebody want to move the recommendation? Councillor Freeman, Councillor Whaley, any further discussion or questions? If not, all those in favor? That's 5 of us. Thank you. And I think you're up again, are you not?
Yeah.
No. Oh, we're back to signs. Sign bylaw, general amendments, prepared by Lisa Morrison, and, oh yeah, you are presenting this one as well. Yes.
Before I begin, I do have a letter of support that I don't believe was provided for members of council as well as the city clerk. It's from the Kitchener-Waterloo Association of Realtors, so I do have copies to provide to everyone.
Thank you.
Okay. So on behalf of Lisa Morrison and the rest of the planning approvals team, I am pleased to be back before you to give you a brief overview of the sign bylaw general amendments proposed. The staff have been working with the current sign bylaw since 2013, and in that time, many changes in the zoning have been established for uses which were not contemplated in the current version of the sign bylaw. And these changes proposed before you today align the sign bylaw with the zoning bylaw, provide regulations for large real estate project or subdivision signs to include realtor signage for all uses within the zoning bylaw, and provide some minor corrections and housekeeping amendments. The alignment of the sign bylaw with the zoning bylaw specifically deal with mixed-use developments within the Northdale neighborhood. At the time that the sign bylaw was implemented, we did not have developments that we do now within the Northdale neighborhood. And so we are proposing some permissions from Sign Zone H, which is the mixed-use community commercial, neighborhood commercial, and convenience commercial plazas, to apply to properties in Sign Zone E that would allow for signage with commercial uses. And this would be an example of a sign in the Northdale neighborhood at 62 Balsam Street, known as Sage 3, for a commercial use that needed to go through the sign variance process in order to be approved. So this would actually comply with the regulations that are proposed to be applied through Sign Zone E. In terms of large project real estate subdivision signs, staff have been approached by the Kitchener-Waterloo Association of Realtors after the approval of the previous version of the sign bylaw. Due to the regulations for real estate signs for larger developments, they were missing from the current version of the sign bylaw. So you do have the letter of support in front of you today from that association, and we will be applying all of the current regulations in the sign bylaw for large real estate project and subdivision signs to apply to all types of uses within the zoning bylaw. And this again shows an example of a larger real estate sign, which would not be currently permitted under the sign bylaw regulations. And lastly, we have some housekeeping and minor correction items. We're deleting the regulations for accessory sign permits, as permits are not required for accessory signs. This was something that was contemplated under the previous version of the sign bylaw and was determined at the last minute not to be applicable. And we are updating and replacing references to previous sign bylaw numbers and removing some typographical errors. So again, you do have 2 recommendations in the staff report in front of you, and I'm happy to answer any questions to the best of my abilities.
Thank you again, Danielle. We have a question from Councillor Henry. Councillor Freeman after that.
Not a question, Danielle, mostly thank you for working on and processing this. Certainly, you had some volume at sign variants that didn't really need to be there to deal with the kinds of uses that council wanted to have in that neighborhood, and now this will significantly simplify the process for business owners that are trying to get a good start in those mixed-use developments, and I think I'm quite happy to see us able to support them today. Also appreciate the update on the realtor signs in terms of scale of those properties and how that flows. I know I had some developer in last week ahead of coming into the formal process, and they have some marketing plans. So I'm pleased that we'll have up-to-date regulations, and we can tell them that they're current and approved by council when we tell them what they can and can't do with that. So I appreciate that as well.
Thank you. Councillor Freeman, please.
I don't know whether this addresses one of the concerns that had been raised to me after the bylaw came up, and I had asked, when I went through the bylaw, I couldn't figure out how it applied, but I'm just going to tell you right where it is, like on King Street between King and Regina, there's a property that the parking lot goes all the way through. And I guess in the past, before we made the changes, they were allowed to have a sign on the Regina side of that thing and another one on the King Street side, kind of at the same time. And I was hopeful that these revisions would allow for us to get back to that, because they're temporary signs. So, and I don't know, did this address that? Because that individual had put their comments through, and I was of the understanding that was going to be considered.
Through you, Mayor Jaworski, in terms of temporary signs were not something that were reviewed through this process. We looked at permanent signs. If that's something that you would like us to take back and take a look at, we can definitely do that.
Okay, I don't want to hold this up, but I thought realtor signs were temporary signs too, but that's fine.
Yeah.
Thank you for the questions. Seeing none, would somebody want to move this? Councillor Henry, Councillor Durrell. Yes, please go ahead, Councillor.
I'll be speaking against the motion. I sit on the sign variance committee, whose job it is to make sure that advertisement is more inobtrusive in the lives of our citizens. And because I'm on the committee and working with the stuff every month, I get an appreciation of the difference between our twin cities, as an example. How Waterloo works diligently to make sure that its signs are appropriate and right-sized. For myself, I think the realtor signs have been fine at the size they are. I can see no reason why they require to be made bigger, so I'll be voting against this motion.
Thank you. Any further comments before we vote? Seeing none, all those in favor? That's 4. Any opposed? That's 1. Thank you very much, Danielle, again.
Thank you.
And now we're back to item 5A. The Canada Cultural Spaces Fund candidate, Canadian Clay and Glass Gallery, prepared by Al McGregor. And hi, Cinda. How are you? And do you have any presentation or discussion, or is this just for questions at this point?
We have no
presentation.
presentation.
Okay. Questions for on this project? Seeing none, does somebody would like to move it, please? Councillor Henry, Councillor Durrell. Any questions? All those in favor? That's 5. Thank you very much, guys, for coming in. And with that, motion to go into closed session. Councillor Whaley, Councillor Durrell, all those in favor? That's 5. Thank you. See you tonight.